facilities to detain people at a very, I think as Senator Menendez has pointed out repeatedly, at great cost. I think there's an interesting thing that's happening. I know of a number of senators, actually you'd be surprised, really from the left to the right, including ones who are pretty tough on immigration issues, who are looking at this and trying to understand, well, okay, this is here. The reason we all know, most of us know what a pupusa is, that there are a lot of Central Americans here. They have family relationships, they're going to keep coming. But what can we do different that we've done in the past, as we've been in Central America now investing in development for about 30 years or more to help stabilize these countries. This week I had a visit from a Cuban official. After telling him he was welcome, he said, what could Senator Corker do to bring investors from Tennessee to Cuba? And I said, well, I don't know, I'll have to look at that, to see what would be possible. But it struck me, particularly having been George Bush's Cuba transition coordinator, that a Cuban official would come to the United States and, of all persons, to me, to ask that question. But it speaks to something larger, and that is that the thing that we have that actually brings us together, I believe, is a shared desire to see sustained and sustainable economic growth. That is something we can all agree on. I mean, even with the Castro brothers, I think they would, while their understanding of it would be somewhat alien to me, I think they'd like to see that. Certainly that's the conversations we have with, say, Daniel Ortega's people when they come up and talk. Certainly the FMLN and El Salvador would like that. Certainly other governments that are more traditionally friendly to us certainly want that. It's certainly what the Mexicans want. And so the question is, how do we help achieve that? And the previous presentation really laid out a number of the tools we have to do that. But as we're thinking about how we approach Central America and how to have that conversation, I think that having that goal is actually important. And I believe that there's a bipartisan consensus around this. The current administrator of AID, Gail Smith, I don't know if a number of you probably know Gail. She's of the development community. She's but Gail, when she was at the state, rather than NSC, really spearheaded something called the Partnership for Growth. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. It's a pilot effort to work collaboratively with governments to identify constraints to growth, and then to work to jointly address those. The program was launched in Ghana, El Salvador, and the Philippines. I think it's been somewhat successful. I want to talk a little bit about Salvador and how that and MCC has had an interesting impact. Also, I'll mention one thing in Honduras, because it has to do with MCC. So the other day I was talking with a friend of mine who works at the IDB, and he was traveling up a highway from San Pedro Sula to Tegucigalpa in Honduras. And he had a specialist in infrastructure with him. Are we 5 minutes? Who said, wow, look at this road. Somebody didn't steal. Says the grading's done right. Drainage is done right. The surfacing is the proper depth. So how did that happen? Well, it happened because there was a joint effort to identify the priority, to undertake the contracting, and to do the evaluation and the auditing. And the Partnership for Growth and this concept is one that is looking at how do you do that jointly? And this, I think, goes to the question you were asking, which is how do you get buy-in on this? And how do you make sure that as we're putting inputs in there, we're value added, but also more importantly, how are we leveraging their own investments? And in Central America, what has happened, interestingly enough, is Luis Alberto Moreno, who's the head of the Inter-American Development Bank, some of you may know him, actually sent all of his people down there to sit down with the Guatemalans, the Salvadorans, and the Hondurans after the Partnership for Prosperity was announced to help them work through their own budgets and and to identify what resources they have in their own budgets and what resources the bank has on tap, both in loans and in potential future loans, to be able to line those up against the resources that they're requesting from us and other donors. So these are, as we're looking at this and we're trying to understand how, from a policy perspective, to leverage the kind of change that is needed. How do we build on this shared desire for sustained and sustainable economic growth, use that as the focal point or the fulcrum for having a shared commitment to prioritization and execution and auditing and evaluation, and at the same time also leverage their own resources in a way that actually makes this sustainable and gets to real change. There's a lot more I could say, but I want to sort of lay out some of these concepts in terms of a larger policy perspective and some of the challenges we see, and particularly with regard to Central America, as we're thinking this through and potentially even thinking about a long-term authorization for Central America, how we're looking at this. And I'd actually welcome your questions and feedback on that, because I think it would be very helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Caleb.